Welcome. You're listening to the 365 Firsts podcast, a show filled with stories of experiencing first times and all the fun, growth, unknowns, and excitement that go with them. It's also the place to get expert advice, motivation, and inspiration to get in on trying new things. And now, here's your host, the master of first times, and chick you're trying to keep up with, Ann Bernard.
I invited Jono Bacon to the show to give you expert advice before your first time crowdfunding. Jono has raised a total of $13,809,171 through 3 different campaigns. Back in 2013, he helped shape one of the largest crowdfunding campaign at the time, the Ubuntu Edge, which had a $32 million goal and ended up raising $12,814,216. While they did not succeed in raising all $32 million, what they did raise did set a record for that time for the amount of funds raised. Jono is a leading community manager, speaker, author, and podcaster. He is the founder of Jono Bacon Consulting, which provides community strategy, execution, developer workflow, and other services. Welcome to the show, Jono. Pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you, Anne, for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this. In a nutshell, crowdfunding is a new way in which products and services and initiatives can be funded. You know, so if you think about, imagine you wanted to create a guitar pedal, you know, that makes a guitar sound. Historically, to do that, you'd probably have to go to the bank and get a loan, or you'd have to have some capital up front that you could use to fund the research and the development and to create your first, 50 products that you could sell and fund your marketing and all those different pieces. The way crowdfunding works is you can use a service such as Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and you can say, I've got this really cool idea, and I'm looking to raise $50,000, say, and you could say it's for a guitar pedal, and we're going to use this money to go towards the research and the development and the funding and the marketing and all these different pieces. And what happens is people learn about your product or whatever you're trying to do, and they usually fund it through a series of perks. And one of those perks could be, $50, for example, and you'll buy this guitar pedal. Maybe $10 could be, we'll send you a T-shirt and a guitar pick. So there's a series of different perks that are designed where people can purchase them, and then that ultimately delivers the target amount.
What that first experience was like of even getting into crowdfunding.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at, when I was introduced to the notion of it myself, the first thing that struck me, which I think was a correct assumption, there's many incorrect assumptions that I made, but the first thing was, this is really not about making money. This is about building awareness. Crowdfunding is more of a marketing tool than a fundraising tool, I think, in many cases. But what I discovered through that process was that it's all about creating an experience and having every single element of your campaign clearly mapped out throughout that time period. Because if you think about a crowdfunding campaign, let's say it lasts 30 days or 45 days, consistently there is a bump at the beginning and there is a bump towards the end, and then there's this massive dip in the middle where kind of the energy and the interest kind of peters out a little bit before you have the quickly, you've got 5 days to fund us, otherwise this will never happen kind of thing. What I discovered even in those early stages was the importance of being organized and providing a really compelling offering for your audience, such as your perks, and making sure that your messaging and all that kind of stuff is important, is well designed, but then also keeping the momentum going in the campaign.
It seems like you're going into a double-edged sword if you don't have a community, because without the community, right, you might not be able to raise the funds. And then the same effort that it takes you to build a community, you apply to raising your funds. What are your thoughts on that? Do you not even go down the crowdfunding route until you have a community? Is that your recommendation?
It's a great question. I think the first question is there an audience for your product? Is this something that people want? There's many, many examples of companies who are brand new, organizations who are brand new, who've had remarkably successful crowdfunding campaigns because they built something that people actually wanted. A good example is the Coolest Cooler, which raised millions of dollars and was one of the top-rated crowdfunding campaigns for many years. And it was basically a cooler that's got, various features like charging ports and things like that built into it. They didn't really have any community beforehand. They just had a product that people really wanted.
So you're heading down, much like any business development, into very heavy marketing and advertisement campaigns, like you mentioned at the beginning. So then what are the keys to making that a success on a crowdfunding platform?
Right. So the first thing I would always recommend is to break your overall campaign into 3 pieces. The first piece is, what is the offering, right? So this is all about the presentation of what you're selling in your crowdfunding campaign.
So can I pause you there for a second to just kind of, as people are, because when I think through this, so you probably have to have money to even perhaps do the campaign, because your offering is going to cost you money to include shipping it out.
Right.
Is that a correct assumption?
Yes and no. I mean, so for example, with Kickstarter, historically their requirements, I'm not sure if it's the same now, were that you actually had to have a prototype built already before you could put it on there, because they just don't want vaporware on their platform. Indiegogo didn't have that requirement. But you're definitely going to need to, first of all, identify, how much money do I need to raise? What am I selling? What is the audience that I'm looking at, right? And imagine you define those pieces, first of all. And I'll talk about shipping in a second, because typically the shipping tends to get baked into the perks. But there is a warning shot I'm going to share about shipping in a bit that I learned particularly through XPRIZE. But that first piece is, how do I present, how do you put the strongest possible ammunition in your slingshot for when people come to your page? And this is about having a really great, 2-3 minute long video, very clear overview of what you're selling, very clear overview of what people get, why it's interesting. And you want to go through, get tons of different people to look at this and provide feedback and refine it so it's rock solid. Because that first minute and a half, when someone comes to your crowdfunding page and they look at it, they're going to make a decision within a minute about whether they're interested in this or not. And you've got to get this information to them very quickly and without verbosity, right? Some of these are so long, but make it visual, make it interesting, like headers and diagrams and infographics. This is all about selling the elegance of what you're doing. That's the first piece. The second piece is then figuring out the timeline. So from the week or 2 weeks before you launch your campaign through to, let's say you have a 30-day campaign, and they can vary in size, through to the post campaign, the month after the campaign is wrapped up. What are the things that you're going to do in those periods? So for example, a pre-launch I think is good. Start announcing that you're going to have a campaign. It's going to kick off in a couple of weeks. Start getting people excited about it, having a social media kind of workflow set up, having content written that you can get out there. And then for those 30 days when you have the campaign, as I mentioned earlier on, you've got the big bump at the beginning, the bump at the end, but it falls flat in the middle. The key here in my mind is it's all about having content that keeps people excited about what you're doing. The other thing that I would incorporate in here is that referrals and endorsements are super powerful. So for example, when I did the Global Learning XPRIZE with crowdfunding campaign, our target was 500,000. We raised 980 odd thousand. I had an interview that I did with Seth Green, the actor. I had an interview with Linus Torvalds, the founder of Linux. Various other people who were in my network, in my colleagues' networks, that we could get on to endorse what we were doing. So the more endorsements you can get, people really trust that, because it's social capital and people are willing to put their reputation on the line for you. Other people will see that, and it's going to increase the likelihood of a sale. The other thing that you might want to incorporate in that is a referrals program. Indiegogo do this, well, at least they used to. I haven't done a crowdfunding campaign for about a year or so, where you could have a competition, like a leaderboard, and whoever referred and generated the most pledges, you could have prizes for them. So we, for example, with the Global Learning XPRIZE, we gave away a trip to a live event, and we covered all the travel and everything for the person who made the highest number of referrals. But then the key thing is when the campaign wraps, for all the people who did pledge, is making sure that they have a really elegant, okay, what's next? What's the timeline? Keeping them updated with what's going on. That's really critical as well.
What are your thoughts on, if someone's thinking, well, I'm on a platform and this is what people do and they come here to do this, I'll get some drive-by money thrown my way. What are that happening?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be other projects on the platform. There's so many crowdfunding projects out there that I would never depend on someone just showing up on Kickstarter and seeing your thing. and deciding to go and buy it. There'll be a very small number of people who will do that, but it's not many. You're going to be really responsible for getting people to your page.
What's a good number and a good timeline to raise it so that you're not on there for too long and it grows stagnant? Like you said, there's going to be a push at the beginning, middle goes low and rises back up. But how do you condense that to make it the most efficient and then stay realistic as far as how much money you can raise?
Yeah, I mean, I would not go more than 30 days. 30 days, I think, is a good timeline. When I worked with Indiegogo, that was often what they would recommend too. I would also, for non-philanthropic campaigns, recommend you do the all or nothing. If it doesn't get the funding, then it doesn't get funded. If it doesn't raise the right amount of capital, then it doesn't get funded. In terms of how much you should raise, it is a really difficult question because it really depends on what you're doing. I think the key thing that I would recommend here is just being incredibly analytical about your costings. So a lot of perks with crowdfunding campaigns tend to be physical goods that are shipped to people, like T-shirts and whatever else. Be very careful with this if you've got a global audience, because there are some parts of the world that just don't have good postal shipping infrastructure. Like if you're shipping out to certain parts of Asia, to Russia, to parts of India, it's very difficult to guarantee that a package will get there. And then what happens is people return it, and then you've got to reship it. And before you know it, you've spent more money on shipping than the benefit of that perk going towards what you're doing. So I would try to anchor more towards digital benefits where you can, and limit the amount of shipping-related content to much higher tier levels of pledging. The people who do like $10 and you get a T-shirt, you can't produce a T-shirt and ship it to Russia for that from the US. You just can't do it. So that's another thing to factor into your pricing model.
We forgot to cover that is important to think about before even considering going down this path, and then what will increase your success rate.
I think one other thing I would probably touch on is one of the things that's been tricky in the crowdfunding space is that it's become massively oversubscribed. There's so many projects out there. So there's a lot of noise to cut through. And not just as the cost of technology and manufacturing is lowering, outside of crowdfunding, you've got lots of products appearing as well. So, whether it's, for example, your podcast competing with other podcasts in the Apple podcast directory, or whether it's a product competing with other, a mobile app competing with other mobile apps, things like that. There's just a lot of noise out there in the world for everybody. So I would say, look at what makes you different and look at what makes you unique. And saying I have a different product, I don't think is enough. I think it's got to be, how can we change the recipe on this and do something different and interesting?
I do have one final question for you.
Yeah.
What is a first time or a new experience that is on your list?
This is going to sound a bit weird. It's orchestral scoring.
Ooh, explain.
And what I mean by that is, so I've been into music for years, and I'm a big fan of everything from AC/DC through to the most brutal death metal you can possibly name, like Cannibal Corpse. And I love orchestral music. And there's a band called Dimmu Borgir who are like a pretty aggressive black metal band, which is a kind of a strain of metal, which is all about kind of evil and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of silly when you listen to it. But what they do is they have these huge orchestras playing behind this metal music. And you can do a lot of the scoring for this on a keyboard with software and all the rest of it. You don't need to have access to an actual orchestra. And I really want to do that well.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so my website is jonobacon.com. Jono bacon, like the delicious breakfast meat, .com. And I write blog posts and articles and things like that on there. And there's more information about my consulting there. And I also have a brand new book out, which is called People Powered: How Communities Can Supercharge Your Business Brand and Teams, which is published by HarperCollins Leadership.
So once again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Anne.
You've been listening to the 365 Firsts podcast. Hope you've got inspired to start your journey of first times and new experiences. Join the 365 Firsts Challenge by downloading the app at your local app store. Check out Next Level Firsts Coaching for additional assistance. Contact us if you want to share the stories of your latest firsts on the show. Now, go get busy having new experiences.